Let's get the conversation started. Equity is not the same as equality. To further illustrate this point, consider giving everyone the same box to stand on to look over a fence. This is equality, but it doesn't make any sense to give someone something to stand on if it's not needed. Instead, we want to provide what is actually needed for each person to have access. This is illustrated in this image as the first person. The second person got just what was needed. The third person in this illustration gets assistance, but it doesn't solve the issue. Consider this picture. This is equity. Each person gets what is needed in order to provide access. What is needed varies between circumstances. Resources are allocated differently to allow everyone opportunities for success.
Equality, equity, that's worse, right? Equity means equality of outcome. It means that every single organization has 50% women and 50% men. Doesn't matter whether the men and women differ in their intrinsic preferences, which, by the way, they do. The scientific literature on that is completely clear. It was established by the early 90s. It was established in the Scandinavian countries, where they've done most to flatten out the socioeconomic differential, say, between men and women. Didn't get rid of the differences between men and women. In fact, they became exaggerated. The biggest personality differences in the world between men and women are in Scandinavia, just as the biggest differences in interest between men and women are in Scandinavia. Because when you get rid of the sociocultural differences between men and women, the biological differences don't disappear, they maximize. How else could it be? And as I said, the literature on that is clear, and the way that the postmodernist radicals react to that is by criticizing the scientific method itself. On their computers, which only work, of course, because the scientific method actually works. So, you hear the egalitarian clarion call everywhere. Everything should be equal. Everything should be equally distributed. We should strive for equity. It's like, wrong. Especially if you're a conservative. Wrong. What we want are just hierarchies of competence. Not everyone's a neurosurgeon. You know, if your father has a brain tumor, you probably want a hierarchy of competence for neurosurgeons, so you can pick the one that's the best, so that he might not die. That's what a hierarchy of competence is for. For the postmodernists, there's no hierarchy that isn't based on power. Well, because they think the world runs on power. And that's why they're willing to use power to get what they want, because it's the only thing they believe in. But a valid hierarchy of competence, it's, God, we need those things, man. We need the best plumbers. We need the best contractors. We need the best carpenters. We need the best lecturers. There has to be a hierarchy of quality, and not only so that we know who the best are and can reward them properly, but so that we can reward them so they keep being the best. It's like, you know, if you have a great educator, if you have a great leader, if you have a great thinker, you want to reward them so they keep thinking and they keep educating so they can tell you something. It's not a reward for their intrinsic being. It's a calculated move on your part to suck everything out of them that's valuable as fast as you can. That's what a hierarchy of competence is for. And the idea that hierarchies of competence don't exist it's so cynical. It's such a pathologically cynical idea. And it's actually quite patently untrue, because here's an interesting tidbit from the psychological literature. Let's say you want to determine what the best predictors are for lifetime success in a Western society. Well, what would you hope for? How about intelligence? There'd be a good one. Let's hope the smart people occupy more positions of complexity, right? Because they're smarter. Would you want it any other way? Okay, and that's great. The number one predictor of accomplishment in Western societies is intelligence. So that means the system works. What's the number two predictor? Conscientiousness. Well, what's that? It's a trait marker for hard work. So who gets ahead? Smart people who work hard.
Wokeness makes a very strong claim with regard to inequality. Wokeness claims that all inequality in life is evidence of inequity. Now, this is a semantic trick, right? You understand that they're taking the word equality, and then they're taking the word equity, and they are hoping that you noticed that a syllable just went missing there. And that when they say inequality and inequity, what you really think is, okay, well, equity is a good thing, and so if something is unequal, that means it's not equity. Okay, these words have completely different meanings. Okay, if something is unequal, this does not imply that something unfair happened. If you worked hard for your pay today, and somebody else did not work hard for their pay today, you received unequal wages. This does not mean that some deep, abiding unfairness has taken place. But nonetheless, they have to make this case, that all inequality throughout society is evidence of inequity. To reach this stunningly idiotic conclusion, they employ the following argument. They begin with, all people are created equal. Not in their rights. All people are created equal. You are equal to the person sitting next to you in every conceivable way. Thus, if you are equal to the people sitting next to you in every conceivable way, any groups are equal in any conceivable way. Because again, if you are all exactly the same, doesn't matter how I divvy up the room, any group is going to be the same as any other group. Thus, all disparate results between groups can only be due to either natural differences or discrimination. But it can't be natural differences because you're exactly the same as the person sitting next to you. So it must be discrimination. Right? So that's the sort of idiotic syllogistic logic that's being used here. Now the problem is that pretty much every single one of these premises is false. Now, lest you think that I'm exaggerating the case, that I'm just making up what the wokes say about this, they say it right out. It's not like they're hiding the ball here. Ibram X. Kendi, who for some odd reason has been hailed as some sort of intellectual giant, when the man has intellectual wattage that, if translated to electric capacity, might be able to toast a piece of bread lightly. Ibram X. Kendi argues, quote, as an anti-racist, when I see racial disparities, I see racism. Any racial disparities, this means racism. This also means, as the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of African American History and Culture proposes, that inequality exists, and thus, all racial groups struggle under white supremacy. Now, again, every single one of the premises that we just discussed is false. All people are not created equal in every single way. We are created equal in the sight of God. That means that we have individual rights before God. That does not mean that you are equal to the person sitting next to you in any sort of capacity. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But I would guess that in most capacities of life, you are very different than the person who is sitting next to you. You have different skill sets, you have different innate qualities, you've grown up differently, you make different choices. Secondly, if all of us are different, this means that not all groups are going to be equal. Any two groups, anywhere, are going to have different characteristics. If I took a line and I split this room, this half and this half, there would be different average characteristics in this half of the room versus that half of the room. That is just a statistical reality. On average, groups are different. Finally, differences between groups could be due to natural differences, i.e., if you take a group and they are very old, they're going to have natural differences with a group that's very young. So for example, if you look at income statistics, very often you'll see certain groups compared to other groups in terms of income. Well, what if the average age of one group is very different than the average age of another group? That happens to be the case in the United States, by the way, between black and white. The average age of white Americans is closer to 60. The average age of black Americans is closer to 25. And what does that mean? It means that on a wealth level, you would expect older people to have more wealth. They've had a lifetime of accruing wealth. So you have to adjust for age if you actually wish to even out the stats, for example. Okay, this is true with every group. Men and women have very different innate qualities. I know I hate to break that to the left. Men and women, very different. Stuff we've known since we were small children and then had to unlearn because our college professors are largely idiots.
Well, equality would be like you equal opportunity. Two people are allowed to try, and if one succeeds, congratulations. Equity would be, well, let's determine whether or not you are advantaged or privileged, and then hold you back or push you forward based on these certain metrics, I suppose. The problem I have with it is that it's not quantifiable. So this was actually something that was really shocking to me. I was sitting with my niece, and my sister, my niece, and my mom, and I showed this image that people like to share. It's three people standing up by a baseball a fence, and there's a baseball game. There's a really short person who can't see. There's a medium-sized person who can see a little bit, and a very tall person who just stands right up above the fence. It says, this is equality. Each of them gets one crate. Well, one crate isn't enough for the short guy, and the two guys can already see. It says, this is equity, and it shows the short guy getting, 3 crates so they can all see now. And I said, the problem is, when it comes to someone's height, sure, we can understand, let's give the crates to the short guy so he can see along with us. But how do you determine equity based on the color of someone's skin or their, characteristics that can't necessarily be quantified, right? So when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pushes a bill forward that's purporting to be about the environment, but it includes racial equity clauses, are we to assume that her ideology states that if you are not white, you are poor by like it's a guarantee? Or do we have to assume that each individual has different advantages, different cards to play, and some are born wealthy, some aren't? And yes, there's historic racism, but we can't make those assumptions, right?
Right.
So this is to me one of the biggest problems I've been having as like a lifelong left-leaning individual is, who do I vote for?